not going back in time too much about response to disasters, but how can we strengthen our businesses going forward? So I'd like to have our Commissioner of Economic Development say a few welcome words. Joan Goldstein, Commissioner.
Thank you, Darcy. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joan Goldstein, Commissioner of Economic Development, and we understand businesses are still hurting from the flood last year. A couple of weeks after the flood, we launched a business assistance program. We had $20 million and helped a little bit over 500 businesses. This year, there's some hope along the way. The legislature approved a $5 million contingent appropriation to add to the and it's contingent upon whether or not there's funds left over from this current fiscal year, which ends June 30th. So please stay tuned. Make sure that you apply to our newsletter. Just go to accd.vermont.gov and you'll be kept informed about whether and when we'll be able to commence activities again. So we have a great panel today, and I'm here to really listen and learn and help with outreach. So I'll send it back to you, Doris.
Great, thank you. Next, we'll have our Regional Development Corporation Director, Melissa Bowney, comment a bit on how things are going.
Thank you, Darcy. Who in the audience is a business owner? Are there any business owners?
Yeah.
You have to make the time. I know there's many. Wait, are you a business owner in Washington County?
Yes.
What's your business?
This is Margaret downtown.
Oh, thank you. I haven't met you in person. Linda?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much for making it, Linda. I have a lot of questions for you, but we can. We can talk about it later. And thank you. I know it's really hard to take time for this kind of thing from your already very full schedule. And thanks to everyone else too. I really appreciate the mentality of coming into this with as a partner, a support partner, or someone who's investigating what resources are available. So I do appreciate everyone's presence. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization that I work with, Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation. We are one of the 12 RDCs of Vermont. So we're all standalone nonprofits that receive funding from the state, but are not state entities. So we're independent nonprofits that support businesses based on the demands of the region. I became the executive director of Central Vermont Economic Development in March of 2023, and the flood happened pretty quickly after. So I was learning about my new role when my new role changed pretty completely. But I have a great board, including Mr. Ricker, who's sitting next to me, and they were very supportive of a pretty flexible and responsive approach to supporting businesses that have been flood impacted. So in our region, we were aware of over 1,000 businesses that had a fairly significant flood impact. In the first 8 days after the flood, so for those first 8 days, all we did at CVEDC is walk around and talk to people and take notes. That was what we did. At the end of that period, we have been joined by some interesting different people that were helpful for me in processing that. Lindsay Curley, who's the secretary of the agency of the state, she joined me one day, and Bernie Sanders' office joined me one day. And in talking to everybody, we really figured out that what businesses wanted was a comfortable place to go in, a centralized place to go in and ask questions. So we created a flood recovery center. It moved through Washington County. So it was located in Berlin first, it moved through Barrie, and then ended in Montpelier. Where the greatest concentration of need was. And we provided so many different services at that center that when I type them all up, it's 3 pages, single space of different things that we were doing. So it ranged from providing interpretation and translation support for people who were non-fluent in English and needed that support in understanding grant applications and information that was coming out. We provided a lot of networking to other resources. One of the most common requests we got, and this continues to be a pretty common request, is for mental health resources. And people were pretty open in saying, this is just an unmanageable amount of personal stress for me to take on. We also did a lot of financial forecasting. The SBDC was present at the Flood Recovery Center and supported us in a lot of financial forecasting work for a business to sort of say, I'm considering taking on this much debt to support what's happened to me. I'm considering this loan or this program. How does my business have to change to serve that debt? And one of the things that is continuing to be a factor is there is not a lot of business growth happening in the flood impacted areas. So taking on debt that requires your business to have growth to service it is not always appropriate for people. And that's where the BGAP program was really necessary and helpful for people to cover some of those immediate needs. After we had run the Flood Recovery Center for about 30 or 40 days, we started to realize that some of the services that people needed were beyond basic business counseling, which is what we were providing, and were going to cost money. And that's where the USDA, who is also here today, came in. And through the USDA Rural Micro Entrepreneurship Assistance Program, we could bring in professional services for businesses who are coming in to see us. So that could look like popping up a website if someone didn't have a website, and in order to keep the doors open and to keep doing their business while their physical space was impacted, they needed that type of support. It could be bookkeeping, CPA, tax prep so that they were eligible for those grant programs. We did a lot of different work. Then after the Flood Recovery Center closed, so we kept it open for 90 days, we received more USDA funding from the same program and philanthropy from the band Fish, totally unexpectedly. We had written up this, so the Vermont Community Foundation, they gave us some money toward the Flood Recovery Center, and we wrote up a whole proposal to them about extending it. We took in a ton of data about the flood impacted businesses, and a surprising to me data set was that 20% of the impacted businesses in this region are owned by people of color. And knowing that, which is disproportionate to the population, so a greater impact was borne by people of color, disproportionate to the population in this flood. And so in understanding that, we wrote a plan requesting funding specifically to support business owners of color in accessing professional services. And there were additional barriers for those businesses as well. If someone doesn't speak English fluently, is a new American, maybe doesn't have an existing network here, it is more complicated to call a plumber or an electrician and get them to show up and take you seriously. So we provided a lot of support. We had a great restaurant consultant who owns 8 restaurants statewide, and the electricians and plumbers do return this man's phone calls, like, because he's a big customer. So he offered to come in. He was paid, but he was a consultant who could help bring contractors in more quickly to businesses that weren't getting a response or didn't have the network. He was invaluable. And so we were telling people, like, we have this idea, we want this funding. Nothing happened. And then the day before Thanksgiving, when we were closing, we opened the mail and there was just a check from the band Fish written to us that we had no idea what was coming. We knew nothing about. It was a big surprise. And it turned out they had received through Vermont Community Foundation our evidence of this need for this program and just wrote us a check and paid for it. So that was a surprise. And it let us keep doing that programming. It's still ongoing right now. So we are still serving a group of the most vulnerable businesses, and that's defined by businesses who do have a barrier, such as being a new American, having a language barrier, business owners of color, or business owners who are in the low to moderate income category federally. So we're supporting a lot of people who own businesses where this business is their livelihood for their family. And just a basic financial picture of a lot of the businesses I work with, a lot of these business owners might only draw around $30,000 to $40,000 a year of revenue from their business, and that is the money that they're living with. And they may have incurred $150,000 or $200,000 of unexpected costs through this flood. That's a very basic paradigm that a lot of these businesses, small restaurant and retail in mostly downtown Montpelier, but also downtown Barrie, and we do have businesses in the rural areas that are impacted too. So answering that gap and that question for them and how to proceed has been the bulk of our work. We're really looking forward to hearing about the gap too on the contingency and seeing how that can fit into our continued work. But my organization will be continuing to be flood responsive. For the time being, I live in the Mad River Valley and experienced Hurricane Irene and know that it's really about 3 years before you feel like you even understand what happened and what it meant and what you did to begin to recover. And before you start feeling like now we understand the new normal for this landscape, now we understand how to know if this business is making money or not making money, if this is viable. So it's still a process that we're engaged with. And Nicole from the Vermont, I should mention, also from Vermont Law School. So Nicole will be speaking in a little bit, and she was super helpful, as was the law school in the flood recovery center and all the aspects of our work. Legal came up often as a question. So leases with landlords, and that's still a question right now. Now I'm renegotiating that lease with my landlord, and my space has been changed in X, Y, and Z way, and is this lease still appropriate? Or my landlord, who is also a business and is also a business that we support, my landlord has had $300,000 of unexpected costs on his properties. So my rent is going up X amount, and who's going to cover that? So these are situations that that we've come in to support from all the angles that we can. And you know, we've gotten a lot of really interesting and useful data about what the collective experience is. I have a great intern who we met through the flood work, and he is multilingual. So he was helping us in more than one way, but he's also a data genius. And he said to me yesterday, we've been looking for data intersections. So finding businesses or people that, you know, what's the group that's like this? What's the group that's women who are in manufacturing who had more than $80,000 in damage? And he came to me yesterday and he said, there's almost no intersections in this data. Everyone's story is so unique. Like there's just not a way to take this bunch of data right now and make a story about it or a graph about it. So that's what we're kind of looking at from CVEDC, is how do we respond to the issues when they have become very individualized at this point. That's my story.
Journey that you described in assistance. Okay, now we're going to turn to our Small Business Development Center statewide disaster assistance specialist, Deborah Budrio. And she's going to just set the stage a bit about where businesses live in terms of the disasters and how to go forward a little more prepared.
I'm going to ask you to give me a 10-minute signal this time, because I'm going to shorten it. I'm going to try to shorten this. I was asked to prepare something for half an hour, and we were thinking this was going to be mostly business owners at this point in the day. So I'm going to stand up because I can't do it sitting down. So I also like to move around a little bit. So I'm going to talk about first what we do. So the Small Business Development Centers, if you don't know who we are, we're a nationally funded program. We offer in each state and all of the protectorates the exact same service. We all do it slightly differently, but each state offers one-on-one, confidential, no-cost business advising into small business. The SBA is our oversight, so their definition of small business is anyone under 500 employees, which means we can pretty much work with anybody in Vermont. Our sweet spot is really 50 and under. Once someone has a corporation, a business that has more than 50 people, they start building their own set of, usually they have an advisory board plus a board of directors, plus, some consultants. They often have their own CFO and COO. So we start to be, we do deal with those businesses if they ask us to, for sure, absolutely. So what I'm going to talk about really quickly is we've been tasked with creating what we're now calling the Business Resiliency Guide. We got a grant to try to begin to address the kinds of issues that Melissa is talking about, that these businesses, the needs are so individualistic, and yet these businesses en masse, and I was just talking to someone right before this, in all rural areas and all really areas of the United States, this is happening over and over and over again because of climate change and a whole lot of other things. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about what this guide is going to look like, and in doing that, hopefully give you some information. I will say that the reason that I'm the state recovery person is because my area was hit hardest by Irene. And we had never had, I mean, at that point when Irene hit, that was the first major disaster in Vermont for a very long time. And all of a sudden, we had a whole different set of problems that were arising for our clients. We'd never gone through a federally declared disaster as a team. We'd never dealt with people who were at the level of trauma that they were at. And all of a sudden we realized that, first of all, advising is a very different thing after that kind of incident. And that there was a great deal of information about disaster preparedness, which no one had ever done. There's still a great deal about disaster preparedness, which no one has ever done. We joke within the SBDC that if you put anything about disaster preparedness, and now unfortunately disaster recovery, the subtitle of it should be "And Free Root Canals," because that's about the level we're going to get with audience participation. So congratulations for being. We're not going to do a root canal. I'm not a dentist, but it's, it may feel like that, and I'm sorry. So one of the things that we realized was that when an emergency hits, regardless of what it is, the immediate personal reaction, business reaction, political reaction, collective reaction, community reaction is to what? Get back to normal. And so everybody starts doing stuff. In Vermont, that meant a lot of people out with tractors after Irene, moving stuff around that frankly FEMA came in afterwards when we really wish you hadn't done that, because it was like the code and it was all of those things. But so what we realized our biggest role could be was to get people to pause, to stop, to take a breath, and to pause. And when we went back, and when Melissa's right, you really don't understand collectively what's happened for years. When we went back a couple of years after Irene and asked those clients that we worked with the most, what was the most important thing we did for them? That's what they said it was that we'd allowed them a place to come in and pause. We'd also allowed them a place, because we're confidential, and I say this to my clients all the time, I'm on your team. Behind this closed door, you can tell me what you want that team to be. Is it we're going to not reopen for 6 months? Is it we're never going to reopen? Is it we're going to reopen tomorrow? Because all of those are viable responses to emergencies. Or we're going to reopen, we're going to totally change the business. There are studies nationally about the fact that, especially in family-owned businesses where another generation has taken over, that a natural disaster allows the new kids to change daddy's business because they have to, and they're like, yes, because they can't go to daddy and go, Dad, that doesn't work anymore, because they can't. And so a disaster actually allows them the opportunity to make the changes that they were hoping to change anyway. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But we said the other thing is that there was no disaster recovery guide. There again were a lot of disaster preparedness, and I'm going to sound like a total hypocrite because at the end of this conversation, I'm going to flip this to disaster preparedness because it's really important. But we created this. So if you don't have one of these, we handed out a lot of these last summer. This is the disaster recovery guide. This helps you go through the steps that you need to go through after you take the pause. First of all, it's, are you safe? In Irene, I spent 10 minutes with people in a sort of like a speed dating situation in which the first thing I said was, are you safe? Is your staff safe? And are you dry? Do you have food? Do you have, now, the next thing you do is call your insurance agent. That's all you have to do today. That's all I'm going to ask you to do. Then I'm going to talk to you again tomorrow, and I'm going to tell you that you should document. And then I want you to document forever. I want you to document forever. I want you to actually keep an old-fashioned diary. I want you to write down everything that you do every day, literally. And you're going to think I'm crazy, but you're going to go back when you're dealing with the insurance company, or you're going to go back when you're dealing with a legal issue, and you think you're going to remember that you did X, Y, and Z 4 days after the flood. No, you're not going to remember that. I guarantee you, we're human. You're not going to, because that part of your brain isn't working. You think it is, but it really isn't. So I want you to write everything down. And so we pieced it out. And then we created a flow chart that said, what do you want to do? Privately, with us, here it is. What do you want to do? After you do these first steps, you want to open? Want to reopen? Yes. You don't want to? Okay. Let's look at it. And sometimes maybe it's not a good idea. I had people who opened too soon, who closed 6 months later. That's another statistic. Because guess what? The market wasn't that. So they spent a lot of money. You know, unless you're a grocery store or a drugstore or a service that people absolutely must have, reopening immediately might not be the right answer. So again, we tried to get that pause to help people do it. So what did we learn from that? We learned again that nobody, when COVID came, the pause that was impressed upon us all was really traumatic. And then lots of things started happening, and the paradigms changed a lot. And then it was about, well, there's a lot of free money and we just have to go get it. And then the floods came and everybody was like, well, where's the free money again? Here's what I'm going to tell you that I know, and I don't think anybody at this table is going to contradict me, or anybody from National is going to contradict me. That's never going to happen again. Even if there were a worldwide pandemic tomorrow, the money is not going to come the way it came last time, because they learned a lot from their mistakes. And there were a lot of mistakes, and they weren't mistakes because anybody wanted to make them. They were mistakes because everybody was acting with such speed. And we actually kept saying to people, even on the federal level, people should be pausing a little bit right now, but the response is people need it, we got to get it out there. And what we have right now is a situation where we have a lot of debt in businesses that shouldn't have it. And Melissa's right, we don't have a lot of increase in revenue in those areas. And so now we have even still a higher level of debt and an inability to borrow money going forward because they're already maxed out. So we went, all right, what's really happening here? What are my clients feeling? And what I came back to my boss after thinking a lot about this was, what my clients are feeling is a lack of agency. They feel like they don't control their own businesses anymore. Because what's happening? The next emergency and the next emergency. So I was like, I'm going to start making a list of what people are afraid of. And then I'm going to see if people will talk about that, which was kind of a ridiculous thought. Sometimes I have them, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like, I'm going to get people to talk about all of these emergencies. And they're like, well, how's that been working for you, Debbie? You can't get anybody in a room anywhere, even on a national level, to talk about disaster preparedness. And now you're going to make the list of disasters bigger? Wow, that's going to be really helpful. People are going to love you, like, you know, you're going to be everybody's most fun advisor.
10 minutes.
And yet that's exactly, that's exactly what's happening. So I said, what we need to do, the way that you as a business owner regain agency is that you go back to basics. And there are 4 basic skill sets that you need to run a business. So we said, if you do that, if you go back and you assess where you are with those skill sets and you shore them up, something happens. The first thing that happens is the short-term effect of that is that, and the long-term effect, is that you have a better bottom line, believe it or not. You have happier employees, you have happier customers, and hopefully you get to sleep at night a little longer. So the guide is going to be about shoring up these 4 basic skill sets, doing an assessment of where you are. I'm going to hand this out. This is what it's going to look like. It'll be out by the end of the year. Advisors, my colleagues and I are already starting to work with people on it. You're gonna shore these up, you're gonna have better short-term business, but what's gonna happen long-term? You're gonna be more resilient in the face of the next disaster, because they're coming one after another. And there's no hiding from them anymore. We're not, if you wanna put your head in the sand, you probably should not run a business, frankly, because they're coming. I have a colleague in Maine that the bowling alley was their client. That bowling alley owner did not wake up that morning and think a person with mental health issues is gonna come in with a rifle and shoot people in my location. And yet they did. So we have random act of violence on this list of disasters that you need to be thinking about. Now, we also are gonna help you make an assessment about which of those disasters are gonna be most, you probably are gonna be, you're in line for more than you are the others. And if you're in downtown Montpelier, are you gonna flood again? Yes. Sure. That's just the reality now. If you're in Vermont, are you gonna deal with climate change? Yes. We're already dealing with climate change here. So I'm gonna hand these out. This is this. I'm gonna hand out a list of the skill sets so that you can see what the assessment looks like, so that you can sort of rate yourself. This has a education needed, assistance needed, or adequate knowledge. I've been doing this for 14 years. I've run my own business. I've run a bigger company. I would not check all of these boxes of adequate knowledge. And if a client comes into my office and they check them all, I give them a new one and we start. Like, I'm so glad to meet you, old Renaissance. But it's not the truth. So let's try again. And again, I'm not your mother and I'm not your mother-in-law. So you don't have to impress me. You just have to tell me the truth. So I'm going to hand this out. Then I'm going to hand out a generalized disaster preparedness list. And I'm going to show you that if you go do those skill sets and you look at this at the same time, these boxes down on the side are which one of those skill sets you've shored up a little bit more. Because this is the short-term game. Doing all of this stuff. And believe me, I had people after Irene. Ludlow is my area. I had people after Ludlow that still had not done this. Look, this is the last thing anybody wants to do, I get it. But it's also the thing that I pointed out to people when they were upset that the federal government and the state government and the municipality was not responding as well to COVID as they thought they should. And I said, wait a minute, so you want the state, federal, and local governments to be completely prepared for a completely unknown disaster. So when you come into my office, I want you to bring your completed disaster preparedness checklist with you. And I want to see that you've checked everything off. Because then you can start complaining about other people. They're like, okay, no, I can't do that, Deborah. All right, come on, get over yourselves. I mean, look, the reality is everybody was doing the very best they could. So let's just continue to try to remember that. So these guys are going to talk about more detail. I will tell you the same thing. When you come into my office, tell me the truth. Tell me the truth about everything. I want to know if the business is in debt. I want to know if you're personally in debt. I want to know it all because I can't help you identify the problem. It's like going into your doctor and saying, I have this one symptom. And then coming out and going, well, they didn't help. Well, did you tell them also about your heart pains or your indigestion or no, I didn't tell them. I don't want to complain. Tell me everything. Tell them everything. They also have to hold your confidence. This is not the time to be stoic. This is the time to tell us all everything so that we can help in the best possible way we can. And if we don't know it all, then we can't put it all together. We can't. So, and yeah, do your bookkeeping, there are some basic things in here that we're going to teach you. We're going to remind you. You probably already know some of them, but we're going to remind you. And don't do QuickBooks at 10 o'clock at night. No, that's not the time to do it. There's a great book called Eat the Frog First, which means if you hate QuickBooks, don't do it at 10 o'clock at night. Do it at 6 o'clock in the morning. Do it the first thing you wake up. Eat the frog first. It's going to be disgusting. But then it'll be done. You'll have eaten the frog that day. And that's the premise of that book. So that's another one of my pieces of advice. Don't look for grants. There are there aren't anymore. Maybe this BGAT money will come. Do not build a business, somebody said yesterday, on what you think you're gonna get free. It is never, in COVID, it was the only response that could happen. And those programs had problems too, we all know them. Don't build your business for profit on the idea that there are gonna be grants, because there aren't. And don't tell me that your cousin's sister-in-law's niece's daughter, got this grant. Bring her in my office. I want to meet her. She's a unicorn. She doesn't exist. So don't build it on that. And don't go online with one of these companies that says they can find you a grant, because they can't. They're a scam. So don't do that either. Believe me when I say it. I'm not lying. And there are opportunities. USDA is a great
I
partner.
have one grant for you, man. One.
What? What? But it's not free. There's no free money. When you get a grant, it comes with a reporting system. It comes with a different accounting system sometimes. I ran a nonprofit and we got a Susan G. Komen grant. And I had the sweetest bookkeeper on the planet. Literally, she was one of the nicest human beings I ever met. And quarterly, she would come to my office door like this. I go, oh, working on Susan G. Komen? She'd go. It was a totally different reporting system than anything we'd ever done. So it isn't like just free. It doesn't just come. Nobody's your mom anymore. And I say to people, and don't go ask your mother for money either if you're going to work with me. Because I am, we're genetically predisposed to say yes to you. But it's a bad idea. So I'm going to just tell you that unless you're independently wealthy and this is part of your trust fund, then go for it. I'm not your mother either. And if you want to take, people say to me, should I take my retirement? I don't know, how much do you have and how old are you? If you're 25 and you've got $3 million, sure, take something. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking, turn it over. I would like you to take these things so I can pass them out. I am not the advisor here. Charlie Inninger is. Charlie's, probably smarter than I am, so you're lucky. But I'm also available, so take my card if you want to talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Now we're going to turn over to our panel. We are missing one person that is death on the family who's covering HR, but we have wonderful Nicole Kaloran from the Vermont Small Business Law Center covering legal issues businesses have been facing. And we have Peter Rickard from Acrisure, New England, right here in Blair, who covers all the commercial lines of insurance. The two hot topics pretty much just bubbled up as Melissa was talking about. So Nicole, would you like to start?
Sure, I was going to invite the insurance guy to go first, actually, because I usually sleep in and clean up.
You get to fix some of the stuff he says.
Right. Sure. So we were very privileged to work with Melissa and the Flood Recovery Center. And last year, we were in a position where we just got a new congressional grant. We could spin up a quick response for legal needs for flood impacted businesses. So I run the Vermont Small Business Law Center. We provide access to legal services for small businesses in the state. And we serve virtually the entire state with the same reason. It's all rural. So that's how our funding is conditioned. There was 4 main areas that we saw legal issues pop up in after the floods, and those are in the areas of contracts, commercial leases, which really is a contract, of course, business entity governance and succession planning, and then cybersecurity. Those are the 4 main issues. And so I just wanted to, I know I only have a short amount of time here, just for information purposes, because that's what we do, we educate. I just want to draw up some suggestions for how businesses can better prepare themselves for the next disaster. When it comes to contracts, it really is a matter of building flexibility into agreements. It's a matter of including, for the first thing, a force majeure clause. Force majeure is something that allows non-performance under contract. There's a natural disaster, global pandemic, something that cannot be predicted, but that has enormous impact. That is very important to include in agreement because it triggers the alternative performance. What happens if there's a need for there to be alternative performance? And by that, I just mean something else that can be done, whether it's delivering different product or it's flexible payment terms, negotiating different contracts to make sure that in the event of a disaster, there can be a delay, there can be even a withdrawal of obligation to pay. Negotiating all of that into an agreement, really, really important ahead of a disaster, of course. Commercial leases is the area where we saw the most questions, the most challenges, and it's because commercial leases are, unlike residential leases. Residential leases, there's a statutory default protection for residential tenants. They get water, they get heat, they get hot water. There's procedures spelled out for what happens if they don't pay rent, for what they get if there's a habitability problem, there's a health or safety risk in the rental. None of that exists for commercial leases. So it's all in the contract. And that means every single lease is different. Every single lease has got to be interpreted as that document. There's no protections for the business owners that are renting those spaces. So we saw the complete absence of flooding from leases, which means those damages are not dealt with in the lease. That means that the landlord and the tenant just get to figure it out. We saw a lack of procedure for if there is flood damage or just casualty damage. What happens if the place is destroyed? The best one that I saw really is just a simple procedure. 60 days after the date of the disaster, the landlord will decide what to do. And 30 days after that, the parties get to decide if they're going to stick in the lease. That sort of language, though, has to be written in. Otherwise, there's no procedure. There's no obligation for the landlord. There's no obligation for the tenant. It's all up in the air. Who's responsible for damages needs to be written into the lease. Specific damages too. So damage to the walls, that's the landlord. Damage to the lighting, that's the tenant, for example. And that's going to be individual in every single lease too. Early termination or just, again, flexibility written into any sort of agreement, period. If there's a natural disaster, how are the parties going to maneuver and try to make sure everything's taken care of? Rent reduction, this came up a lot because we had businesses who were being told to move back into spaces that were not safe. They were infested with mold. They had not been treated appropriately. And the landlord saying, "Oh, you're good. Let's get back in there and start paying rent." They're walking in with an air quality control test and it's not safe to be there. So again, unless it's in the lease, there's nothing to deal with that. So I'm telling business owners, if they're negotiating leases, which a lot of them are right now, see if you can include something in there that says rent will be reduced if it's not safe to occupy the space. If you want to have something in the lease that says this is what has to be proved, say it's not safe, that's great. But what happens to the business owner if they're forced to go into a space or to pay for a space that they can't use? Right?
Or have they decided that they don't want to reopen, and what kind of clause needs to be in it about that? Because if you break a lease and I don't think that most small business owners understand this. If I sign a 3-year lease, people are like, oh, I should sign a 3 or 5 year lease. Not if it's a new business. I don't want you signing a 3 or 5 year lease, because if you break that lease, you owe the entire amount of that lease when you break it. So if you've got 15 months left to perform, you owe them 15 months. And a lot of out-of-state landlords, they are enforcing that. I've had it enforced in more than one client. So if you decide after a disaster that your business cannot function under the current situation, and again, I say, look, this is what I know from 14 years, nothing's cast in stone and everything's on a continuum, but things about the legal things are cast in stone. So you have to be really careful. So if you don't want to go in and you've got a lease that doesn't allow you to break it under certain conditions, then you owe that landlord that money, and that becomes debt. So.
Other one on leases I just wanted to mention is keep really detailed records of any improvements that are made to the space. It should be spelled out in a commercial lease anyways, who's responsible for paying for repairs, taxes, insurance, all that stuff, but also if there are improvements to the space, who gets the value of those? And in the event of a disaster, who gets the value of recovering those improvements to the space? Is it the landlord or the tenant? In general, when it comes to just business entities and governance, we really like to see people look at their operating agreement or their bylaws for their business, make sure that there's emergency authority assigned, who's going to be able to make decisions for the business in the event that the owner is unavailable. And comprehensive insurance coverage is very, very important. I'm sure you're going to go over some of the different policies too. We always recommend that they're going to need to have the general casualty, but also even like director and officer insurance, we're recommending people have that, so that if there is a dispute about how the directors of the business recover from disaster, they may need to have a claim there. I've got a lot of other stuff in here, but I don't want to take up too much time. Why don't maybe we pass back to Peter, and then if there's any other areas you want me to cover, I can just pop in and say stuff. Go for it, Peter.
Sure. So Peter Ricker, Sugar Minkman, formerly Dennis Ricker Brown. So we are everything insurance. So everything from home, auto, boats, recreation vehicles, business insurance, workers' comp, D&O, E&O, life insurance, employee benefits, retirement planning. You can think of it, we have it. So as is mentioned, it's a very stressful time when you're dealing with, especially with the floodplain. And there's many reasons for that. So what we do when we meet with our clients or prospects is we go through, like you would with your attorney, or with your doctor, or with your financial advisor. We go through everything because we want to know everything about them. And one thing you need to know about most insurance policies, property and casualty insurance policies, is that flood is excluded. So flood, you have to get as a what we call a standalone policy. And the majority of flood policies are written through the National Flood Program. There are some private entities that write flood insurance, but they tend to steer away from the high hazard flood zones, which would be downtown Montpelier, downtown Barrie. There are some policies some fire policies that include flood coverage, but again, they usually exclude high hazard flood zones. So we'll go back to NFIP because that's really where most of the policies are. And the thing to know about the National Flood Insurance Program policy is that it's an actual cash value policy. So they take into account your building or your contents, and then there's depreciation involved. So to your point, we recommend that you inventory, document, photograph. Photographs are great because that'll show the condition of the property prior to the flood. The other big thing that is really detrimental to folks, and there's really nothing that we can do about it, is that the flood insurance policy does not cover loss of income, business income, as your standard business owner's policy would. So if you had a fire in your business and it was shut down because of that fire, well, your business income is going to kick in and fill that gap while you get back up and running. The flood insurance policy doesn't have that. There are some other markets outside of NFIP that offer that, but they're very hard to find. So some of the things we learned from this past summer was, and I want to share those with you, is that for flood preparedness, make sure that you have electronic copies of your policies, both the flood policy and the standard business owners policy or commercial package policy, whatever you have. Because when it comes time after the flood, you're going to want quick access to that. To your point, you need to get a hold of your insurance agent. And the flood carrier is going to want to see that your other policy does not cover flood. So then that's where the claim gets moving. What else? Remember, the flood policy through NFIP is also specific to location and specific to building. So if you have more than one location or if you have more than one building, you need to buy a policy for each of those. What else here? Inventory in the basement is not covered. Property contents within the basement are not covered. It has to be above grade. So obviously our recommendation is to keep all your contents above grade. But if you can't do that, I understand space is limited. So if you can't do that, make sure that you do everything possible to keep it as high as possible and in a sealed container. The other thing too is if you experience the flood, you may want to consider purchasing a pump. Because as Linda can probably attest, after the flood, it's almost impossible to find one. So if you go ahead and get one ahead of time, and preferably gas powered because you may not have electricity. So what happens after the flood? Two of the biggest things that we saw were, how do I put this? Bad actors that come into town. So make sure you do your homework when signing a contract with these folks. For one, too, is that the cleanup, the pumping out, the cleanup, that erodes your flood limits. So the more that you can do yourself, so if you have your own pump and you can do that yourself, the more you're going to save your insurance limits for the actual rebuilding. And make sure that the contractor that you hire follows the FEMA remediation guidelines. They should know that. And if they don't, you may want to look for somebody else. What else here?
I'm going to put a plug in for the pause again, but I'm also going to put a plug in for, I cannot say how many times I say to my clients, and I will say on this one, the majority of them listen to me, so I'm really happy about this. Don't buy insurance online. Buy insurance from these, buy insurance from the guy that's in your town or the woman that's in your town. Go work with them, because when you take the pause after the flood and you can actually go talk to them, you're going to feel a whole lot better. And if you did not back up your insurance policy or keep it electronically, or you don't believe in I hear this one a lot, I don't want to put anything in the cloud. My backup was in the basement. Oh, okay. So now where are we? We have flooded backup. That's not good. Or in Irene, we had your computer. My backup was sitting next to my computer. So your computer, I used to say your computer's in the Chesapeake Bay and your backup is in Nova Scotia. So that's really helpful. So no, the cloud, sorry, try that. But if you have a local agent in that pause, you can pick up the phone and go, this guy, and I heard ServPro was not very nice in some places. You know, this guy just came in, he doesn't know the answer to this question. What else should I be asking? Do you know them? Are they approved by you? That's the kind of thing that having local people really, really help. Also, come on, he lives in your town. He's got, his kids go to your school. I mean, it keeps the whole ecosystem working. And look, I know some things you just have to get on the web, but I don't believe insurance is one of them. And guess who you're going to talk to when you call an insurance? Right now, you're probably, if you're calling the major companies online, you're talking to an AI generated bot. And they've been trained to say no first. So.
Good plug.
You're welcome. He's taking me out to dinner.
But to her point, I mean, I'm not the only independent insurance agent in town. There are a number of them. I know that we all, after the flood, we were all downtown meeting with our clients and trying to help out. One last thing I'll mention that we saw was an issue for our clients is first, if you have a loan or a mortgage, make sure you have the correct financial institution on your policy. They're going to want to be on there in the first place, but if you've paid off your loan, get them removed, because they're going to have that check endorsed. And secondly, following up on that is that once you get, once you get the settlement agreement with your flood insurance company, once you agree to that, then make sure that you know when you call your financial institution, then you know how to get that check endorsed from them. Because what we found was some of our clients were getting delayed. They weren't getting to the right people. They were getting the wrong answers. And instead of having that money being put to use, it was delayed weeks because they couldn't get it endorsed. Make sure that you get that taken care of.
Yeah, things change all the time.
Right. Stay on top of that.
Is there other kinds of insurance that come to mind just in terms of being prepared generally, like not necessarily about a disaster, but just for challenges that a business will face, whether it's
Well, I'm sure Nicole can attest to this. One of the biggest areas we see is employment practices, and then cyber.
Yep.
So cyber is exploding. I'm sure you get phishing attempts every day in your email. That's something where what you want to do is you want to set up the best firewall that you can, and then have insurance be your backstop. So if the bad guys get through, insurance will be the backstop. But you want to make sure that you're working with the best protections up front, and then the insurance will back it up.
And you really have to be careful that you understand that business and your personal life are very different. So if somebody steals your credit card and it's your personal credit card, you call the credit card company and you say, my card is stolen, and they go, and you report it immediately, and then, you know, whatever charges happen on that card go away, and you're not responsible for them. If you get hacked, and I've had a couple of clients get hacked, one of them, because they checked QuickBooks and Panera, don't check QuickBooks at Panera, please don't. Only check your QuickBooks and your financial institution information when you're in your own office on your password protected network. Just, yes, Panera has a password. It doesn't mean anything. It's all over their walls. You know, it's like, here's our password. You know, no, that doesn't work. So don't, be careful about that. But what they found was this hacker got in, pulled all their credit card information, and started using different people's credit cards, and they were responsible for that money. The business owner was responsible for that money, because QuickBooks is not, Inuit is not, and it's all in the fine print. But guess what? Nobody reads the fine print of all those agreements. So you have to know, you have to know what these agreements say, and you can't just assume, well, it's just like my personal credit card. If I call, they're just going to stop it. No. I had one company that literally, even with a lawyer, small company, 5 people, $500,000 in revenue every year, pretty decent bottom line, that went completely away because this hack cost them about $60,000, and they were able to negotiate down to 40, but they still had to pay the 40. So be really careful, read that stuff, and do your cybersecurity updates. Don't just assume that they're doing them. You know, well, they say they do them. Well, make sure they do them. And it's another great big piece, and I know it's scary, and, you know, I don't understand 3/4 of it sometimes either, but you have to find somebody who does.
And don't assume that just because you may use the cloud or you have your credit card processing company that you work with, if there is a breach, don't assume that they're going to pay for that.
Yeah, exactly.
You are the one that they went into the contract. And look at your contract. I haven't seen one that says they're responsible. So make sure that's where the cyber liability will come into play, is that, so if your PCI agreement doesn't, if there's a breach and now all your clients' credit cards are at risk, you want to make sure that your cyber policy covers that.
Would you recommend business interruption insurance?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But like I said, the flood policy is the bear.
Right.
But you know, anybody that doesn't have business interruption insurance on their policies now, make sure when you get back to the office, make sure that you go home and get that into play.
I was going to say the 4 points that I wrote down for cybersecurity were implement the robust measures. So make sure you train your employees, back up your data, and plan for how you can respond to a data breach. Just got to prepare for all of those as eventuality.
I'm going to do a plug for Nicole and her group, because I don't think we use the Business Law Center now all the time. And before the Business Law Center, we had an agreement with VTS-BDC and Nicole's group. What they offer is, and this is so priceless, is they will give you a session for free, which you will not get legal advice, but you will get legal education. And what I find with my clients is they're a little nervous about going to a lawyer sometime. Again, their sister-in-law's cousin's, niece got either made $2 million by suing someone, or they lost $2 million by being, not finding the right lawyer. So it's one of those stories. It's one of the end of those spectrums. What Nicole's group allows my clients to do is sit with someone and frame a problem. This is what I'm thinking. This is what's happening. What could I do if I did go to a lawyer? And be prepared to go into a lawyer's office, and then they can make a recommendation. They now, with this new program, have 10 hours of free legal service that they can get you. And if you've prepared, you can get a lot of work done in 10 hours with a lawyer, a lot. If you haven't prepared and you eat up the first 8 hours explaining the problem and trying to figure out the terminology and doing all of that, then yeah, you're gonna start spending money sooner. So it's online. You can go and fill out a form. It's an amazing service, and it's given, and it doesn't just cover these kinds of issues. I would say the most use that I've done out of it is I have a lot of clients who have intellectual property issues. They don't have a lot of inventory, but they have a great deal of value in the intellectual property that they've created. That's, if you don't understand the intellectual property world, it's a complex, what's a trademark, what's a copyright, when should you have a national one? Go talk to them. Also, they've created with us a lot of webinars. We have a webinar on intellectual property. We have one on Act 250. That's another one. Do not go into a town and think that you're going to be able to not pay attention to zoning, or if you have over 10 acres, Act 250. Darcy and I were just talking about this before we got in here. Don't pretend that it doesn't happen, la, 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 and then call me and go, I'm really upset because they just came and they told me I can't do it. I'm not sure what to tell you again, so they've done one on Act 250. Bankruptcy, it's not, nobody likes the word, but it is, as they got the bankruptcy head judge in the state of Vermont. There's one, she was one of the most brilliant speakers I've ever heard, who said, I've been doing this for 20 years. Bankruptcy, if you have to be there, is the most ethical way of dissolving that business. It feels, and you shouldn't feel badly about it. If it's used correctly, it works extremely well. And it's actually the most ethical because it is the one that gets all of your suppliers the most amount of money that they can get. Instead of you deciding it should be this person or that person or whatever it is. And frankly, if you have to go through it, and I've had a couple of business owners who've had to, you learn so much about things that if you've done them differently, maybe. So it's also an educational process because most people that I deal with are serial entrepreneurs. And that's the other thing I found. The first thing that you should learn as an entrepreneur is you're going to hear no a lot. Your response to that should be, why did I get a no? And then second, what's next? Next? Yes, okay, heard the no. Tell me why. Don't come into my office and say, the bank said no. My first question is going to be, why did the bank say no? Well, I don't know, I didn't ask them. All right, so the first of your homework is you're going to go call the bank and say, why did you say no to me? Because I can't help you fix it if I don't know what they didn't like. Sometimes I can guess. A business plan on the back of an envelope is not a business plan. It's something, it's a nice placemat or coffee mug, coaster, but it's not a business plan. But if you've done a great business plan, you've still gotten a no, then I need to know exactly why they said no so that we can, and it could be some reason that you don't even understand, but I still need to hear it. So I want that information. So then you go, okay, we got a no here. Now let's fix it. Now what's next? That's the next thing. Because you're an entrepreneur, you wouldn't be sitting in my office. You wouldn't be running your own business. And the reason we all continue to do this job is that we love you. We do. You're fascinating. You're interesting. No day is ever the same. Melissa will tell you that. No day. Nicole will tell you. It's never the same. So
I have a question on the recovering from the cyber breach. What
Yes.
are the recommendations and is there help out there for small businesses to do that recovery? I know larger businesses do testing all the time and they don't have a plan, but what would you recommend, or is there a council?
Yeah, it's tough. I actually don't have any recommendations, to be honest with you. I would suggest, obviously, anybody who has some sort of a breach to come to me. I can get them to an attorney very quickly. We can advise them, or we can educate them.
also call the police, and they're going to get the FBI involved, but you're going to want that part of the protection too.
And there are some limitations, like there's a certain number of transactions or pieces of information that trigger the obligation to report a breach, right? But you could have, think about a business that sells apples that keeps a customer list. That's private information. If that customer list gets into the hands of the wrong person, that is a information breach. So it can extend to really simple batches of information as well. I think speaking to the lawyer as soon as possible, having that insurance would be good to be there ahead of time, but just internal policies, everything that's already been mentioned, backup data, make sure that it's under lock and key, make sure that it's not located next to your computer, make sure that employees are trained for what to watch out for, keep the information secure to the extent possible. I see a lot of businesses that just simply go to a third-party vendor. They go to Etsy, they go to some other platform where that platform has the appropriate privacy policies that they don't need to keep any of the information. If business is keeping customer information, they're at risk of a breach. So.
And if HR was sitting here, they'd say one of the things in everybody's personnel file should be what equipment do they have
Yes.
that they can take
Yes.
off the campus? What equipment do they have access to on it? Who has the passcode to what things? And then if you're about to let someone go, the first thing you have to do before you do that is you need to change the passwords to everything that they already have access to. So you want to put some protections in place like that. So, and I think we think, oh, well, I don't need to change that password. They won't. Oh, how angry are they?
Yeah.
And maybe they don't appear very angry. And then 2 hours later, you find out that they were pretty angry.
Yeah, well,
So-
with COVID and everybody working from home, that really
Yeah.
drove cybersecurity because
Yeah,
of.
exactly.
And so you want to make sure that you've got multi-factor authorization. So when you go in, you have to be signing twice, you get that PIN back in order to get in. So if people have access to your data off-site, you want to make sure you have those proper controls in place. And to Nicole's point earlier, if you don't have a cyber policy, absolutely, you're going to want to seek legal help. But if you do have a cyber policy, they will provide that for you, and they will even, most of them will provide the forensics to find out what happened. So that's important.
In both of my cases, the FBI did get involved because it's immediately cross-state.
Yeah, anything cross state lines. Yes.
And they were very, very helpful. They were really, they never found in either case who it was, of course, because that's just, you're not going to get justice that way. So don't even spend any time trying to figure out what that is.
Do we have any questions from our business owner?
Go ahead,
No
stand-
pressure, Linda.
No pressure, just stand up and represent all business, small business.
No, it was very, very interesting things, and, we implemented a lot of the stuff, and some of them we implemented at the basement was full of water, so it didn't matter how high the inventory was off the folder.
Yeah.
So it's not, but it's all good advice, and, we're making our business plan, and we're trying to be resilient.
Wanted to ask Sarah Rearing, who is a great resource here today, the director of USDA Rural Development, and Melissa mentioned the room was very helpful here. So here we get a chance to couple that's related.
Absolutely, and I will move from the comfy seats over here to the west. So for those of you who weren't here this morning, USDA Rural Development is one of 8 mission areas under the Department of Agriculture. We do all kinds of things. People think of us as food stamps and meat inspection and firefighting and all of it, and we do all of it. Our division, our agency is economic and community development. So we do loans and grant programs and loan guarantees, which I'll talk about in a second, to municipalities, to nonprofits, to service providers, and to small businesses. So very briefly, I'm just going to outline the opportunities that exist under our business programs arm. Generally, the way we work with businesses is in 3 different ways. First, we provide grants to technical assistance providers like an RDC or a nonprofit organization who might help you with services like your website, your marketing plan, your transition plan, anything that is a professional service that a business might go to try to get. We provide grant funding to a TA provider, technical assistance provider, to do that either for reduced costs to you or for free, right? So we grant money to the nonprofit TA provider. The other way that we work with businesses is to create revolving loan fund mechanisms in the states with usually community development finance institutions, CDFIs, or non-traditional lenders. These are often small or micro loans. Sometimes, in the case of the program that Melissa was referencing, they come alongside with technical assistance money. So you can have the staff and you can have a small revolving loan at the same time. So we lend federal dollars to intermediary lenders to revolve in the small business economy. The last way that we work with businesses primarily is to work with your lenders and guarantee your larger expansions as a business owner. So if you have $1 million project, we would work with the bank that you are choosing to work with. The bank would come to us and say, we'd like a loan guarantee on this. And then we actually back the bank to be able to pay you the loan. Ideally, that means the bank or the lender will reduce your interest rate. That's the goal. It's not written in law that they have to, so they don't always, but that's the hope, is that it not only provides them security to feel like your loan is less risky, but it also hopefully allows them to be generous with the resources that they have. That is similar to the SBA loan guarantee program. So our lending community in the state of Vermont, and I actually have a 2-state jurisdiction, so same in New Hampshire. We work a lot with the Bankers Association. We work with folks like Vita, Community Loan Fund, and others to manage those sort of lending portfolios. There are 2 grant programs that I'll mention very quickly with all the provisos that Deb told you about grants, okay? You have to write reports, you have to call us, you have to fill things out. The 2 grant programs, the first one is really designed for our agricultural producers. It's called the Value Added Producer Grant. It takes a farmer essentially into a value-added food product. And it allows you actually quite a flexible amount of activities to be able to fund. You can fund general operating, you can fund staff, you can fund marketing, you can fund all kinds of things. It is a cost share, and the thing about federal grants is that they're usually reimbursement based. So the other piece of all of this is that you usually have to have some upfront capital to manage getting the money when the work is done on the other side. So that's value added producer. But the one that the Inflation Reduction Act has plussed up for us by almost $1 billion is our Rural Energy for America program. That is open to value-added producers and also any small business. So we follow the small business metrics that the SBA sets, right, in terms of your NAICS code and your small business size depending on your sector. But what this does is 2 things. We are looking to reduce your energy costs and reduce carbon emissions. The ultimate metric for the Rural Energy for America grant is either a reduction in BTUs or kilowatt hours. That's what we're looking for. If you propose to us $1 million project with solar panels and an HVAC upgrade and all these different things, we can come in and in some cases pay up to 75% of your costs under the Inflation Reduction Act with a grant. So there's still a cost share, but if you ever wanted to reduce your energy bills, if you are on 3-phase power, if you want to put solar panels on your roof, it is ideal for businesses, unlike most of Melissa's, I think, it is ideal for businesses that own their own infrastructure, right? This is not a leasehold improvement grant program. So that's one thing to consider, is that we are looking for those small businesses that actually own and operate out of infrastructure that is theirs. But reduce your energy bill, come to us, get some solar panels on it. We literally have, I don't know, quadrupled or more than quadrupled the amount of money that's going out the door. This program used to be open twice a year. It is now open 4 times a year. We used to do between $1 to $2 million a year. In the 2 states combined, we're now doing up to $9 million almost every quarter. So now's the time.
When's the next round?
Ends June 30th, and then August 30th, and then it's November, October, whatever. They're all online. I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
It's every quarter. So basically, like, we have enough money to put solar panels on all the small businesses that need them. So come to us. It is a bit of a wait time because we do have to go through environmentals. There are other pieces to it, obviously. So if you want to do it this summer, our funding is not the best, but if you're looking at it for next year, come to us now and get in line and get the application. And with that, yes, ma'am?
You said that you have to go through environmentals, you have to go through like the NEPA for each one.
Unless it's a Cat X, you have to go, yeah, absolutely. I mean, all federal funding,
Yeah.
right? So like, that's a cross-cutting federal mandate. So Cat X's, if you're putting solar panels on the roof, a categorical exclusion for a construction project is the easiest way to get through. So if you are not actually disturbing the ground with your energy expansion or your renewable energy project, many of our projects are Cat X's because they're buying equipment to upgrade their lighting.
Yeah.
They're buying new refrigeration systems. They're buying new HVAC systems. You just bring it into the building and install it. If you are looking at a major expansion, and we did this with a slaughterhouse, it's a different story. Right? They're just going to be like, they're using three-phase power. They're using a lot of water. They're using a lot of propane. They're trying to change over all their systems. That requires a different level of environmental review. And they are already a business that has a lot of environmental considerations. But, you know, we have, for example, like a whole portfolio of folks who are in the self-storage category who are like, oh, I'm going to pay all my electricity bills by putting solar panels on my own roof. And now they have $0 for electric every month. So, yeah. I will also just say, sorry, gentlemen, New Hampshire is beating us out, you guys. The New Hampshire applications are like 3 times as much as the Vermont applications. I think it's because we had a disaster last year.
Yeah.
But bring them on in. We want more from Vermont. Yes.
Are they subject to the Built
So everything is now, all federal agencies now. So we had a series of waivers that allowed us to get a number of programs kind of in under the BABA deadlines. But yeah, and that's
Most
all,
solar
that's all
panels come
written in.
from overseas.
And there are ways to get through that because of the folks who buy them versus the folks who manufacture them. So there are ways to get through that for sure. Yeah, I'll stop there unless there are more questions.
Any questions?
Get solar panels now. Yeah.
Yes, I think we can adjourn and thank the panel greatly for all the insights. And we do have everyone's cards and in the other room 10. So if there's anything that was of interest to you, and the disaster guide brought some.
I brought a few, but online, and I was just noting to Melissa, just last week, this has gone up, sections of it in 10 different languages. So we're really excited about that. And the BRG will be in at least those 10 as well.
So much. Last Eric. So we do have one more session. It's the private nonprofit workshop. Are there any nonprofits here? Great.
You're the one
I want to give you some time to go visit these folks in the room next door. But you don't need to wait until 3:30 if you want to get the home early and down here. So what say we do about 20 minutes and we'll kick off the next session in here? Does that sound okay? Perfect.
I'll get on the first.
When do we meet again?
June 20th. That would go to my boss, absolutely. I love that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was about to. I'm gonna give you one from next week. All right, because I have. No. But no, come in Saturday. Oh, so this is what the new one's gonna look like. Yeah, so it'll be a new one just like that, and we're still exactly here it's gonna be delivered. The idea was, here are the disasters. Yeah, and I'm gonna add a couple more from the Soviet. If I try to talk about this.